Welcome to Playing Above the Line's very first mini-series. I'm Alan, your host, and this episode is one of 10 we're recording with T.R. Miller's legendary football coach, Jamie Riggs. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group, a business consulting and accounting firm focused on preparing clients for the future through innovation and positive growth. This episode is sponsored by the Brewton Area YMCA. Since 1986, the Brewton Area YMCA has served as a fellowship of men, women, and children of all races, religions, ages, and abilities, dedicated to uplifting the human spirit, developing an intellect, and improving physical fitness and good health. Call 251-867-9622 to talk with their staff or visit www.brewtonareaymca.com to learn more about their programs and memberships.
The story that we have here today is, and maybe I can preface it this way, is that in coaching circles, we play a lot of games. Mm-hmm. And so we have memories of games, and sometimes they're among coaches, something will bring up some game from years ago, and the next thing you know, we're sitting around talking about this game, what we remember about it, and what happened, and so forth. And so in this instance, one of my coaches had sent me a clip of a game from 2007. I watched a clip and just started laughing and remembering the things that happened that evening. So I wrote this October 23rd, 2015, before the Excel game. And anyway, the night before, this was what was kind of on my mind a little bit.
And one thing about this that stands out to me about this particular story is it says a lot, too, about the dynamic between a coach and his family and wife and son and that kind of thing, because you feel a lot of roles as a man, being a head football coach and then also being a dad and a father. So I think that speaks a lot to that as well. So this is a good one.
Yeah, though this one's called the screen pass. T.R. Miller versus Excel, October 23rd, 2015. Coach Mark Edge sent me a video clip recently of a play from years ago. My wife, Becky, remembered the play and reminded me of another of her shining moments in support of the Miller Tigers that very night. Coaches often reminisce about games from the past, and no one from our staff that coached that night can mention the game without talking about the screen pass. It was October 12, 2007, and we had traveled to Jackson to play the Aggies. We were in the midst of one of our only 3 losing seasons in 50 years, and we would end up the season with a record of 5 wins and 6 losses. This team tried desperately to have a winning campaign, but we were a really young group, and it just wasn't to be. On this night, we were certainly outmanned by an impressive-looking Aggie squad. To make matters worse, our quarterback, John Matthew, was injured, and Will Riggs had taken over as the signal caller as a freshman. In addition to being young, Will was also very small. To make matters worse than that, our center, Mabry Cook, had broken his hand and had surgery on Tuesday and returned Friday to try and play. To make matters worse than that, he could not snap right-handed. He would have to snap left-handed, even out of the shotgun. I've often said that through the years that no one could pull together, strap their helmets on, pull off an improbable victory like the T.R. Miller Tigers. Our players could always use their great courage and team spirit when we were in a jam like no one else. On this night, we did just that, hanging tough and refusing to give in to a superior team. It was the fourth quarter, and we had the ball deep in our own territory with little time left on the clock. We were behind 26-20, and the Miller fans that had traveled an hour and a half to Jackson that night were cheering hard for a miracle. But all we had to offer them was a freshman quarterback, a wrong-handed center, and a minuscule sophomore running back named Cortez Banks. Jackson had a defensive end that year was about 6'4" and 250 pounds, and he would make the All-State team. Will could tell you a lot about him because he hit him after almost every pass, and we passed a lot that night. I remember after the game asking Will how many times he got hit on the 20 passes we threw, and he looked at me and said, 19. As we got the ball back, I called for a screen pass to try and slow the rush and hopefully get our young quarterback, keep him alive a little bit longer. We had practiced this play a lot, and our passer and our running back executed the screen to perfection. Will waited for the rush to get to him, and then he lofted a soft little throw over the head of the big defensive end right to Cortez. We made a couple of blocks, and suddenly he was in the open field like an answered prayer. They finally chased him down just short of the goal line. We scored moments later, and when Christopher Griffin kicked the extra point, we won the game 27-26. Will told me after the game that when he threw the screen pass, the big defensive end, and I'll quote Will here, destroyed me. He didn't even see Will throw the ball and thought he had a big sack. When the big defender turned and saw Cortez run down the field with the ball, he said, "Oh, man." And in a moment of sportsmanship that no one else in the stadium saw that night, he then apologized to Will for hitting him, jerked him off the ground with one hand to help him up. In addition to being a good player, the Big Jackson defensive end was first class. It was a great victory, and the screen pass became part of T.R. Miller folklore. Now, Becky traveled to many games over the years, and she had all kinds of riders with her. She packed the car with the wives of other coaches, children, neighbors, students, and just about anybody hanging in the parking lot at the high school that needed a ride. On this night, she was excited about the victory, and she found the Jackson radio station that was doing an after-the-game call-in show. The radio guys were discussing the game and said that on the big screen pass that set up the winning touchdown, we had linemen that were downfield illegally. They said that the referees blew the call and that T.R. Miller should never have won the game. Now, as truth would have it, the play was legal because we threw the ball behind the line of scrimmage, which means that you can't have linemen downfield to block. So imagine that. Radio announcers that don't know what they're talking about. Becky was infuriated. She started fussing about the announcers and how they should not be talking about our team and our players as though we had cheated to win the game. Now, on this night, she had Sharon McAnally, wife of our middle school coach Gerald, in the back seat. Becky continued to fuss until Sharon interrupted her and said, "Here, Becky, I've got the radio station on the phone and they have us on hold." Suddenly, Becky had Sharon's cell phone in her hand and she heard someone say, "You're on the air. Who are we talking to?" It was time to put up or shut up. At that moment, my wonderful wife, Mrs. Rule Follower, Mrs. Never Tell a Lie, Mrs. Always Do the Right Thing, said into the cell phone, "This is Emily. You shouldn't be talking like that about the Miller team. Both teams played hard, and the referees made some bad calls on Miller too." Then amazingly, the guys on the radio said, "You're right, Emily. We shouldn't have said that. It was a hard-fought game, and the referees were equally bad for both teams." She hung up, thankful that it was the Jackson radio station and no one from Bruton would know it was her. For many days afterward, she had people tell her that they heard Emily on the radio after the game. I've always said that coaching was more a lifestyle than an occupation because it's a job that involves your whole family. Everyone knows you as coach, and your family can't get away from it. As I watched the video clip that Coach Edge sent me of the screen pass, I couldn't help but smile. It was but a single play in a year of many, and it appeared to be a simple screen pass. But it will always be more than that to my family. I designed the play and called it. My son practiced it over and over and threw the pass that helped win the game, and his mother defended the pride and honor of our team on the radio, even if she had to masquerade as Emily to do so. T.R. Miller defeated XL 42-6.
Coach, that was a great story. A couple of things as you were reading that popped into my mind, and one is just adversity. I mean, one of 3 losing seasons in 50 years, right? And so you've got a team that I guess they're playing for that pride, but I mean, how do you motivate a team that is really not down and out, but I mean, they're not having a great year, maybe not a whole lot to play for? I mean, so what was the message going into that game in particular, just about the fact that, hey, I mean, we still got some games to play, right?
Absolutely. And what you're really trying to do is convince them that if they'll keep working and keep playing as a team, that we are going to get better. One thing about not being very good when the season starts, there's a whole lot of room there to get better. And we're trying to convince them that if they'll practice hard and do what they're supposed to do, we're going to get better, and that we will win some games down the stretch. And we talked a lot about when we got to October. Mm-hmm. We're going to win some games to get to October. Yeah. We're going to have a chance to beat Neal. And we have a chance to make the playoffs. We got all these things that are in front of us. We just need to keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, and we talked about this a little bit when you were on before. We had you back on in February. You were the head football coach, but you had two of your sons that played for you. Michael played for you. He's the older of the two. But now Will comes along. Talk about the emotions of sending your son out there in got to be a tough position. The starting quarterback's hurt. He's a freshman. You've got this huge defensive end that's just been beating on him all night. Yes, you're the head coach, but you're also a dad. So what was that like? It had to be tough.
The triangle between me and him and his mother was an interesting dynamic, particularly because at the time that year, John Matthew was our quarterback, and John got hurt, I think, the first game of the year. Best I remember. No, actually, he got hurt in preseason practice and got a bad cut on his hand, couldn't throw a ball, couldn't take a snap, couldn't do a lot of things. And Will had ended up being a backup quarterback because between John and Will, we just didn't have anybody that was really quarterback material. Obviously, John was going to play. Will was a backup. Something happened, and all of a sudden, Will has to play. And he's basically a 135-pound ninth grader, so it was a tough dynamic. But he actually did okay. We had at that time, and I think everybody knew this at the time, probably the least talented team we had in years and years and years, and it was going to be a struggle. So the fact that the coach's son's playing quarterback, we're going to have a struggle, there was some interesting things going on. But I will tell you one thing about that I thought was pretty interesting is that about 3 weeks before we had played Atmore, and they had a great team that year, and they had a big defensive end that we absolutely could not block. He lit up. That's a football term, by the way, lit up. He got lit up by this defensive end several times. And I think we won the game like 14-2. That's not a great offensive performance when you score 2 points, which means you got a safety. That's what you got. So after the game, I talked to him just briefly after the game. He didn't say much. He went home. I'm at the field house. We're watching film, doing something. My phone rings. I answer it. It's my wife, Becky. She said, "Will wants to talk to you." I said, "Okay, well, put him on the phone." She said, "No, he wants you to come here." Okay, so I'm like, okay, all right. So this must be important. They don't call the field house and tell me I need to come home.
Right.
Okay, so I go and I walk in, and he's sitting in the chair. He said, "I just want you to know something." I said, "What?" He says, "I can do this."
Wow.
And so I said, "Well, okay, that's great." He says, "Okay, you can go back to the field house now." I said, "Okay."
Quarterback was not his original. That was not his first position then?
Yes, it was. It was
okay.
actually his position. But because we were so short on quarterbacks, we went from, I think John was a junior that year, we went from junior to ninth grade. We didn't have a quarterback in other classes or anything. So he kind of got that thrust into him a little bit, just part of it.
Well, speaking of Becky, your wife, I'm sure there are probably football coaches' wives out there who are passive and may not, I'm not going to say not care, but they may not get into it quite as much. But, I mean, Miss Becky, you could never say that about her. So talk a little about that particular dynamic. I mean, you were putting her baby in there to get lit up by this huge defensive guy. I mean, did you ever in the back of your mind think, oh, my gosh, when I get home, this is not going to be good? Or did Miss Becky allow you to kind of make those calls and realize that was part of the job?
Yes, she did. I told her along the way a little bit, here's what's going to happen, and he's going to make some mistake, blah, blah, and that kind of thing. So she knew. But now, by this time, she'd been around for a long time, around football, so she understood a little bit about what was going on. She kind of left that up to us. Her main rule about this was we did not talk football at the dinner table. Okay. That was her rule, which we violated on occasion.
Understood. Well, Coach, this is a great story. I mean, it says a lot about adversity. It says a lot about passion. It says a lot about commitment. So thanks. This was a good one. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you did, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. It definitely helps us in the ratings, and it also makes it easier for other folks to find the podcast. And as always, a big thank you to producer and editor Carrie Wolf. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Avizo Group. If you want to know more about who we are and what we do, you can visit our website at avizogroup.com. That's AVIZO group.com. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.